All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Melanin Margin. I'm your host, Quaviondre Williams.
And I'm Daquon Wilson.
And this is the talk show dedicated to bringing the marginalized to the spotlight and uplift the Black voices that will no longer stay silent. So let's get into this week's race conversation. Daquon, Black capitalism. Do you think that your family discusses finances at all?
Nah, not at all. Like, it's one of those things that, like, honestly, I did not hear about, like, tax things or how much, like, my dad makes until, like, college when, I had to do the FAFSA, and so I needed that information. So I think that, like, like, finances in general, like, things like how to budget, how to, like, manage your checkbook, or all of those different types of things was, like, never discussed growing up, or even just, like, now when I have my whole adult job and there's things like health insurance and all of these different types of tax savings plans and HSAs and 401ks, IRAs, all of that stuff. I was like, what is this? Because this is some foreign language to me.
Yeah, I do think it's very common in Black households not to talk about that kind of stuff until it's literally like right in front of your face that you have no other choice but to talk about it. Like, I didn't really understand like bills like that. Like I understood that we had things to pay and the things we're doing, stuff like that. One of the best things that my mom ever did for me growing up was that when I first got my first job, for like the first couple months, she let me keep my check all the way, right? But like after about 4 or 5 months in, my mom made me start paying rent. So I pay a percentage of my check to my mom it would like 150. If I made like, my check was usually like 300 or some change. And she used to make me pay like a 150. And she was like, this is your rent. And it kind of got me into the idea of knowing that sometimes a big chunk of your check has to go into somewhere else to make sure you have somewhere to stay. So in that way I was helped or whatever. But like, there's some things that I wish that I knew about, like savings, really understanding what savings were, really understanding how to set aside money for certain occasions, or set aside money for certain things like that, or just the really fact of, like you said before, understanding tax breaks, understanding that you can actually put in donations and stuff, and when you go to donate stuff, that can be a tax write-off that can give you more money, or understanding how to write your taxes and do your taxes in a way that will work, especially when you have, you go to school too. There's other breaks and other tax breaks that you have there. But like my mom and my dad, there's nothing against them, but they were not fully aware of those things because it's just not talked about. And do you think that has any contribution to why our Black families are less likely to have generational wealth?
I think so. I think that it's one of those things that you can't do what you don't know. And so, like, if you don't know, like, all of these different properties on, like, managing money and finances and everything like that, you can't manage your finance. Like, if you don't know the difference between, like, a regular savings account and a high yield savings account, or don't even know high yield savings account exists, you're not going to know how to use one, or know, like, the differences of, like, interest rates and APRs and all of that stuff, or even with like credit cards and how interest works on those credit cards. And then before you know it, you're in a whole bunch of debt because you have that credit card, you swiping it, and you're just like, I'll pay it off eventually. But that interest turns out to be more than what you were paid in the first place.
Credit cards, I think, are the biggest trick in the world, because the truth is credit cards are not real money. They are literally just to show that you can pay a bill on time every month. If you think about it, the way I thought about it originally, because again, my mom, my dad, and my family didn't really talk about that kind of stuff, and they weren't really knowledgeable on that kind of stuff. So when I first got a credit card, I thought that a credit card was additional money. So like if my check was $350 or $325 and I had a $300 credit line, I had $600 altogether. That fucked me up. That's not what that was. Because what people don't know, like credit cards are literally not real. What I had to do in my head was realize that credit cards are things that are just the bill. So you put bills that you're going to pay every month on it. So you put like your car note, your car insurance, you put that on credit cards, you pay that off because you're going to pay it every single month. So instead of using the money that you're going to use to pay the bill on the bill, you use your credit card to pay it, and then you just pay off your credit card. But like I thought for the longest time, and I got into quick credit card debt real fast, especially when the APR hit. Because APR fucks you up. Like you think, oh, bitch, I only got like
all the way.
I thought I had like 190 something. That shit went to 250 real fast. I said, what? I didn't spend no money. They were like, baby, that's APR and the membership fee. And we just never talk about it. Especially, I didn't notice this too, but like in Black families, we don't really talk about health insurance or will. We don't talk about it. And I've noticed that recently. Recently, I have had some experience with a lot of death in my family. Recently, 2 of my family members passed away. And I just realized during the discussions with the family after the aftermath and, looking at it, stuff like that, like how insurances and certain policies lapsed at certain times. Some of them have insurance policies that was signed up at the right time or whatever. Like, it's just so much confusion. And like, we just really do not like, have you talked to your mom about a life insurance? Like, do you know about your mom's or dad life insurance or whatever?
Not at all. Like, it's one of those things we don't talk about. And I think a lot of times it's because for a lot of us, especially those who come from like lower income backgrounds or who don't have like a whole lot living paycheck to paycheck or whatever, you're like, what do I need life insurance for? Like, I don't have anything to pass on.
Exactly. It's one of those things. And I didn't notice this, but they said a lot of white families, the reason why some of them have generational wealth and why their money accumulates like that is because they have life insurance policies. Because when their family or their mom or dad passed away, mom or dad had $500,000 life insurance policies. So if mom and dad both pass away, you get $1 million. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you both y'all got that money to put aside for other things like that. You have time to go through the motions or whatever. So like, that's how they built it, capitalizing on life insurance, because unfortunately we all gonna die. And I think that a lot of times in Black families, we have the superstition that if we don't talk about death, nobody's gonna die. That's not that it. Does not happen.
It doesn't work like that.
I was talking to my mom about that. Like recently, I was kind of like, should it happen? Like, I was, and it just not just in the older members of the family, but even the younger ones. Like to my mom, I told my mom and my sister, my life insurance policy is X, Y, and Z. This is who you got to get in contact with if something happens to me. And you need, the last thing you want to be worried about when someone dies is how am I going to bury them? How am I going to cremate them? How am I going to do this? How am I going to take that? And plus, sometimes you need that life insurance policy to not only afford therapy, but maybe just to take some time off of work and not have to worry about going back because you ain't got no money to pay your bills. But we just, in Black families and Black households, we just don't have that conversation.
Exactly. And I also think that a lot of times we forget or we don't notice that like these like life insurance policies and everything, like those are things that you should be getting at a young age, because the older you get and like the more like preconditions that you have, the more expensive it is to just have one. So you need to be able to get it while you're young and healthy and like can actually afford to get a good life insurance plan.
Or like you said before, just understanding that, life happens. So stuff gets muddled. And my thing is, even though death is a hard topic to talk about, it's going to happen to all of us. And so I would rather have the conversation, this really difficult conversation one time with my mom or with whoever, or in your case with your mom and dad or whatever, have all of it written down, have all the numbers written down of who to call and who to whatever. Put it in a folder and never look at it again until you absolutely have no other choice. You only got to do it. You only have to have the conversation one time. But we just, as I've noticed that in a lot of Black households, we just don't. And we don't know what people want when they die. Some people don't want to put on, or don't want to be the what is it? DNR, do not resuscitate, stuff like that. We don't know what our family wants. We don't know how long they want to be left on life support for and stuff like that, because those things aren't written down, like living wills and stuff like that. Like understanding like, hey, if something were to happen to me, this is how we're going to protect that. Like, and I've also noticed that when it comes to those things, even to some of the people that do get the life insurance policies and that do get a little bit of money when their family dies, whatever the case may be, I oftentimes see that there is this misuse of the money Like it's more of like trying to use it to kind of stun on people. And I want to ask you, Daquon, do you think it's more common for Black people to try to keep up with the Joneses, like trying to stunt?
I don't think that it's more common than like other groups. I think that we just notice it a lot more just because our communities are more likely to be affected in certain ways that cause different socioeconomic issues. And so you notice that kind of contrast between how, especially how like the media portrays Black communities as being impoverished and barren or whatever like that. And then you see people that have like luxury items or something like that. And it's like, it creates this cognitive dissonance, but I don't think it's any more common in Black communities than it is in any other community.
Okay, so you think it's more of like the light is more shine on it more often, you think maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've noticed a lot of times too that, you know, oftentimes when you see people who come from like, you know, in more impoverished neighborhoods or more, you know, poor socioeconomic backgrounds, that you will oftentimes see that when they do get a chunk of money from like life insurance or from a settlement of some kind or just won a lottery or something, that you would oftentimes see that they would get very like posh, very like, oh, I don't do that no more. I don't know who the fuck these people are anymore. Like it's very much so like I'm suddenly like what is it, tax season? People start buying Lamborghinis and Mercedes Benzes, knowing good and dang well that in about 3-4 months they're gonna get repossessed because you ain't got enough money to pay the car payment no more. You know what I mean? Like, and you see it a lot, and I've seen it a lot. Like I said, I don't know if that's just like you said before. It just comes from society's more shining a light on it more. But I've seen it a lot where it's like it just seems like when you see people come into money, it changes. And I always say that money doesn't change people. Money just reveals who you really are. And it's so sad to see that oftentimes I've seen that a lot of African Americans who have come into a lump sum or whatever, I've seen a lot of them make that mistake of either trying to buy so much and do this and do that and do this and do that. Because like you said before, I think that all of that comes from like, because you were impoverished or because you come from a poor background, that having money, you don't know what to do with it. Because, and the reason why I say I think personally that it does happen a little more, it's more common in households of color. I'll say that, maybe not African American, but I would say it's more households of color because of the fact that we don't discuss finances and money. Does that make sense? Like, check me if I'm wrong. Check me if I'm wrong. Check me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you are right. I think that there is this part of it where it's like, if you come from a background where you know you're living paycheck to paycheck and you get this large sum of money, you're going to be like, hey, let me spend it before it's gone, because like you never know like what's going to happen, or you know somebody come and like whatever happens, like you kind of have this like urge to like use it because you don't know like when it's going to go, or even then like you don't know when like the next lump sum or whatever is going to come your way. So you want to get things that like you've never been able to get for yourself beforehand.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I think it's more common is because it's more like, because of systemic racism and because of white supremacy, it's more likely for African Americans and people of color to be put in impoverished situations. And because of that, and because of the lack of financial literacy within our communities of people of color, because I feel like financial literacy is most common in white households that I've seen. I've known some of my white friends who know about 401ks and knew about that stuff in like not elementary, middle school, high school. And I'm kind of like, the fuck is that? Like, I was like, I don't, you know, I know them about like trust bonds or like trusts and what is it? Stock, what is it? Buying stocks and stuff like that or whatever.
Yeah.
I had friends who were buying stocks in like freshman, sophomore year of high school. And I'm just kind of like, what the fuck is a stock? What is that? Like, and I just I didn't understand that. And like I said, I think it's because of the fact that in households of color, there is this, like you said, it's always kind of like that mind to stay out of a grown folks' business, usually. And it's oftentimes, but you see in white households, it's very much so like, no, we're teaching you about finances and we're teaching you about this because we want you to be in the same place as us. And I think it's all about, what is it called? Opportunity, or like having that available. And it's just more uncommon for such financial literacy to be available in households of color, because of how white supremacy has made it so that it almost feels it has kind of created this degree of separation there, so that they can stay in power. They keep making us go like, well, don't have those conversations, or y'all don't have to worry about all that, or we'll worry about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because you would oftentimes see that a lot of times, you know, it's more likely for people like rappers or certain black singers or whatever to be taken advantage of because taken advantage of by white people because of the fact that their families or that their community has never taught them about how to manage their own money, or at least how to be in a space to where you can understand where the fuck the money's going. Am I making sense here, Daquon?
Yeah, 100%. And it's also like, I've noticed this a lot, especially with like you were saying, rappers or singers or actors, even, like, they think, okay, like, I'm famous now, so like I'm going to have all this money, but then they don't realize that before that money gets to you, it goes into a whole lot of different hands and pockets before it trickles down to you. And then you're kind of left being like, okay, like what's happening? Like, I don't understand why this is. Or even just like with other like professional fields, I think that, you know, we're kind of taught that like we shouldn't be talking to others about like our salaries because
Yes.
like that's unprofessional and stuff like that. And I think that's a product of white supremacy in terms of like making sure that people don't know, oh, so-and-so is getting paid more than you for doing less work.
I think I fully agree. I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of my friends a while back, and this is why I say that, the reason why I say that I think it's more common is because of how white supremacy has really got us tricked out here. Because I remember this girl, she's African American, and she was like, her check was just looking really, really slim. And she's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on here. Like, my check is not looking right. Like, what is happening? But at first she's like, okay, maybe it's not, you know, maybe I'm just in my head or whatever, right? But like, she would sit down one day and she was like, she just sat down one day, she was looking at her checks. She was like, I'm not making the same amount of money as blank, because she had actually talked to her white coworker and was like, well, how much are you making on your salary for the same, because we are with the same position. And they were like, well, I'm making X, Y, and Z. And she was like, hold the fuck up. We're not making the same amount of money. We're doing the same job. What the fuck is the problem? So she went to her office, a manager, and the guy was like, yeah, that sounds about right. You're good. Like, he kind of brushed her off about it. And she was like, no, something is actually wrong. Like, I think that there's an issue. She had to call the corporate office and everything. Turns out they were debiting out insurance from her account that she doesn't have. So they were debiting out like almost $50, $60, $70 from her check for insurance that she didn't have. So they had to cut her a check back. But the reason I bring that up is because the fact is, unfortunately, in the society we live in, people of color are more likely to be taken advantage of in those kinds of situations. That things like that can slip through the cracks because we're like, well, this is what we're supposed to have, right? This is what it's supposed to be. Without really, we're taught not to ask questions, you know. And it took her a little bit to be like, it took her a couple months before she was like, hold on a second, you know. But she noticed the issue as soon as it happened, but she didn't feel comfortable enough, or she didn't feel comfortable enough to actually go up and talk about it, because in our community we just don't. It's not something we discuss. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's completely crazy. And it kind of brings up this kind of question of like, if, you know, in all of these white supremacist spaces, we are being taken advantage of, is the solution to that to work and deal with only Black businesses?
See, I have really mixed feelings about that. You know what I mean? Because like, on one hand, I'm like, absolutely, like buy Black, support Black, whatever. Like, that is absolutely the case. But it's also this kind of idea of like, it's like like buying Black and doing and supporting Black businesses is absolutely something that we should be doing, period. Like, we should be, because that's the reason we have the BET network. That's the reason we have Black spaces, because oftentimes white spaces don't welcome us in. Black people Black spaces are supposed to be safe spaces for people like us, where we're not going to be taken advantage of. But it's one of those things where it's like, on one hand, it's an absolutely amazing thing, and that's absolutely something we want to do. But on the other hand, you oftentimes see that, or at least I've noticed sometimes, that because it's almost like this shame that's surrounded, like, if you don't buy all absolutely strictly Black, that it's like, oh, now you're anti-black. You don't care about black people. Fuck the business that you paid for. Fuck the stuff that you do for it. Fuck the business that you do support. Because unfortunately, like in life, you know, we have different avenues that we go down with things that we want to purchase and things that we want to be a part of. And I don't think that, I think that that is absolutely something we should do. But it's really, it's difficult because, once again, just because you're buying black doesn't mean that you're helping black people. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because just because that's a black business doesn't mean that black people own it. You know what I mean? It's hard to sometimes feel that too. It's also the fact of, just because you're supporting someone who's black does not mean you're supporting black causes, because supporting Candace Owens does not support black causes. You see what I'm saying? So if we went with that, if I bought Candace Owens's book or whatever, and I'm like, I'm supporting black business, I'm supporting a black person, it's kind of like, I'm supporting a black person, but I'm not supporting black capitalism. I'm not supporting black success. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Or am I all the way off of that?
Yeah. No, you're making total sense. I think that I'm with you in terms of, like, I'm all about, you know, buy black, support like local black owned businesses, all of that, because like it is important to like show up for your community.
Absolutely.
But I also think that, like, at the same time, you know, it's one of those things that like we can't think that this is the only solution that's going to happen, because like we see throughout history that whenever there is black success, somebody's going to bomb it, somebody's going to tear it down, somebody's going to do whatever they need to get rid of it. Or we also seen a lot of times when like businesses start like really small and like black owned and everything, and then like as they grow, they, you know, go under a parent company from like a white owned business, or they trade like leaders or whatever like that. And so then it's no longer the same business that it was beforehand.
And I think for me, the reason I have a little bit of a hesitation is because some of those black businesses also support anti-gay bills, anti-LGBT stuff. So it's like, as much as I'm like, yes, support all black businesses, like if this black business is giving money to people who don't support me as a gay black person, it's like it adds that extra level of like the same thing with, and I'm the same way with the LGBTQI community. It's like, I would love to buy LGBT, but if I'm only buying to support white LGBT, it's like, it's so much, like I said, like you said before, it's just, of course, support black business, support black success, support gay businesses, but it's also like, but sometimes those things are in opposition to the goals that you're trying to do. I'm trying to support black people, but if those black people don't support gay people, I'm not supporting myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or like, if I'm supporting this gay cause, or I'm supporting this gay event that doesn't treat black people, or doesn't hire black people, or doesn't have anything with people of color in it, I'm not, even though I'm supporting a gay business, I'm supporting a gay business with faulty morals. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also think that like a lot of times some of these kind of talks about black capitalism, especially when you get into like the political sphere, has like this alternative motive. So like I was reading this article from the New York Times that was talking about black capitalism and opportunity zones, and it was talking about how opportunity zones started with Richard Nixon and promoted capitalism to be the natural cure for the ghetto. And Nixon talked a lot about how instead of government jobs, government housing, and government welfare, let the government use its tax and credit policies to power the greatest engine of progress ever developed in the history of man, the American private enterprise. And so, and this is something that's been like so popular that like every single presidency after Nixon has had some form of like opportunity zones or promise zones under Obama, or like all of these different types of things that are like supposed to promote black or promote businesses in predominantly black and low income areas. And the reality of what happens is, even if you are promoting businesses in that area, once those businesses start booming and become more successful, then the taxes on that area around it starts going up, and that's how you get gentrification. And so then you are displacing the black residents who were there. by, saying you're doing something for the Black community, but you're really doing something to displace them even further.
Yeah, it's crazy, and especially with that kind of situation, like it's just like it's so hard to see. Like there are so many people who are like, especially during like the hi gay, happy Pride Month, like that kind of thing. Like that is very much, it gives very that energy sometimes, especially when there's like, well, we want to support Black spaces or we want to make space for Black people or whatever the case may be. But it's like you're saying that, but your actions are not actually doing that. Just because you're saying that I'm creating opportunities or I'm creating whatever does not mean that's actually what's happening.
Right.
And just like in those, and just like in Black spaces, like just because you say you're supporting Black business, or just because you say you're a Black business and I'm funding a Black person or I'm funding a whatever the case may be, does not mean I'm supporting. Like it's like the idea of like, what is it? Like Caitlyn Jenner running for office. Kind of like, just because I may support her journey as a trans woman does not mean I support her policies. I'm not about to vote for Caitlyn Jenner.
Not at all.
Trans woman. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like this weird kind of conversation. I want to ask you a little bit about that too. Like, do you think that it's like a little bit of like, do you think the shame against not buying Black if you're Black or not buying gay if you're gay is justified?
Nah. Not at all. Like, I think it's one of those things that, like we were saying like earlier, yo skin folk ain't your kinfolk. Not every Black person is actually pro-Black. Like, Black people can be anti-Black as well as just like so many other things. And so like, just because you're supporting a Black business doesn't mean what they're doing is anything less exploitative than any other company that there is. Like, I personally don't think that adding the word Black to capitalism kind of gets rid of the exploitation that capitalism presents in general.
Exactly. I fully agree. I think that it's this weird conversation because like even when you think about Black capitalism or just like the idea of it, there's this quote unquote degree of separation there, right? And like oftentimes you'll see people going like, well, you're saying buy Black, why can't I say buy white? And it's kind of like, baby, that's not, baby, like, please,
Two different
like,
things.
Like, and I just want to ask you, Daquon, I just got to ask this question, but like, do you think that Black businesses, specifically like BIPOC businesses, period, are racist or are a form of self-segregation?
No,
like
not.
Not.
Like,
and
it's literally like one of these situations, like, just because a Black business says, oh, it's a Black-owned business, doesn't mean it's saying Black only. Right. Just like we talked about with like BLM, like saying Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that only Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. You're qualifying it your own way, and that's not the case. Like, I think that white people will often say it's racist and say that if we did the same thing, that it would be being supremacist. And it's kind of like, babe, we're not excluding any, huh?
Y'all did.
Like, yeah, like,
it's called segregation, Jim Crow.
And I'm just like, we're not excluding anyone the way that white businesses have done and still do in so many discrete ways. Like, we are just letting people know that we are a business that understands and respects the culture and that we may be profiting off of it, but we actually understand said culture. White businesses don't do the same thing. And it's kind of like, you can't be a white business selling Native American stuff and being like, oh yes, baby, we support the Native Americans and all your money's going to white issues and white whatever the fuck. Like, that's not how that works. Like, you can't.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It's not there.
And there's so much conversation where I just don't understand why. Like, there's this, and I understand white supremacy, obviously, but like, it's just frustrating to me because there's always that dialogue of like, why do y'all have BET? Why do you have to say you're a Black business or a person of color? Why do you have to specify that? And it's because it's a way to let people know. It's a way of virtue signaling, letting you know that if you buy from this business, it's going to be authentic from our culture. If you buy from a Native American who makes Native American dream catchers and stuff like that, or whatever, you're supporting Native Americans and you're getting something from someone who understands how to make it the proper way, how to make sure it actually symbolize what it's supposed to symbolize, kind of thing. And you also have somebody who is aware hey, this is problematic. This is not. What I'm doing is, you know what I mean? Like, it's very much so. I'm not saying that it's like, you know, all these businesses are monolithic, but I'm just saying that, like, having someone from the culture creating or benefiting from the culture is better than someone who has not had any exposure to the culture whatsoever, but profiting off of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's also one of these things where, you know, you want to support like BIPOC owned businesses because historically they have been, you know, misrepresented and like not given the same equitable resources. Especially when you think about like how banks would give loans to certain people and not other people. So you're kind of using this as a way to like undo some of these historical injustices, even though like it's very small. And like we said before, like Black capitalism isn't the end all be all. Like there needs to be much more change. But like by supporting a Black owned business, you're like, I want to invest in somebody that probably has not been invested in by mainstream society.
Exactly. The opportunities for Black businesses to succeed are not as prolific as white businesses. It's just a fact.
Right.
By BIPOC businesses, period, trying to get started, trying to get out there. Like you said before, unfortunately, there is always going to be racism in anything. And even people who say, or the banks who say, we give loans to everybody who has the right qualification, whatever. Unfortunately, it is always going to be that level of like, well, that's a white person starting a business. So they might be more likely to succeed than a Black person might be. Even though that's not the truth and that's not reality. The facts are people are going to have their biases and biases towards things. I want to ask you something too. Like, do you think that Black businesses as a whole, like if we were put in positions of power and stuff like that, or BIPOC people of color in general, do you think that that is going to be the key to sustainable success for people of color?
I wouldn't say that it's the key. I think that like, of course it can help, you know, having a seat at the table or even owning the table yourself does help create some lasting changes. But it's also one of those things that you can't just like trust somebody because they're Black, because we've seen it time and time again when people do get in those places of high power that they're not really there for the people. So like all this time, like, yes, representation is important, but like, is that representation based in action is the real thing.
Is it good representation? Is it someone who's actually benefiting, or are they a figurehead? Because that's oftentimes what we'll see is that a lot of times white people will put Black people in positions of power without giving them any actual power. They're literally just like look, we have a Black person. We have like, and it's very much so that energy of like, look, we have somebody who is a person of color here. But like I said, it really feels like very affirmative action, diversity hire kind of thing. Like,
right.
And it's like just because someone is African American or Native American or Latinx or whatever the case may be, or Asian American, does not mean that they have the interests of said community at heart, or the interests of all said communities at heart. Because unfortunately, as African Americans, we are exposed to a society that tells us to fear the unknown. We are exposed to a xenophobic, racist, transphobic, homophobic, every phobic society. And so we have subconscious biases against certain people, regardless of whether or not we may share a similar experience. Just because I'm African American does not mean that absolves me from being prejudiced against a Latinx person or a Asian person or whatever. It does not give me absolution from perpetuating stereotypes, perpetuating certain racisms or whatever the case may be, because unfortunately, as people of color, you take on the traits of the oppressor. White supremacy has ingrained in us that being white or proximity to whiteness is better. And so the closer you are to being white, or the closer you are to being the model minority, as you talked about before in a previous episode, the closer you are to being quote unquote successful or accepted. And that's the problem that I see in a lot of these particular situations, is that like you would elevate certain people to a position of power, but like you also see that person may not necessarily have the best interest of people of color at heart, or of the or Asian people, or LGBTQIA people. Just because we had a Black president does not mean that Barack Obama had all of our best interests as Black people at heart. You know?
Right.
Honestly, I think that a lot of times we have this thing where people think that just because this person is quote unquote a representative of the race does not mean that that doesn't absolve them from critique. You know?
Exactly. And I think that like we have to realize that like Blackness is a spectrum.
Ooh.
Like how Blackness is expressed in the South is going to be different than how Blackness is expressed in the Caribbean or in other places of the African diaspora. So that's A. Plus B, we have to realize that like at the end of the day, it's still a business. And so there are going to be times when hard decisions are going to have to be made, and people are going to have to decide between the business and the people. And not everybody is going to choose the people, because at the end of the day, they need that job and they need that job to stay. So they're going to choose that business.
And that's what I think that many people don't understand, is that like you said before, it really is a business. And sometimes even businesses are oftentimes put in positions where it's easier to take the quote unquote, you let this person go, or you're not really having the best interest at heart of this person or this community. And like, looks like there were Black slave catchers. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like you said, all skin folk and kinfolk, baby. So just because someone is from a marginalized community does not mean that they are someone who is going to support causes or support the agenda of that community as well. Does that make sense? Like, even with, like I said, even with bringing up Barack Obama again, like, remember when he was like, I'm evolving on gay marriage? Bitch, you should just be knowing that that's like, what do you mean evolving? Like, what? Like, I don't understand. Like, you know what I mean? Or like I said before, like, understanding that like, it is amazing that we have a female person of color as our vice president, one of the highest positions of power in our society for a woman, especially in America, to have her in one of the highest positions of power there is, next to being a president, you know, but it does not absolve her from any kind of like, oh, she might not have homophobic tendencies, she may not have sexist tendencies, because the reality is we take on the traits of the oppressors. Women can be sexist, not saying that, you know, she is, but once again, her being a person of color and a woman does not absolve her from having sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic. It just doesn't do that. Just because you are a marginalized person does not mean that you will not further marginalize other people.
Say that again.
Just because you are a marginalized person does not mean that you will not further damage marginalized people. That's just the reality of the situation. I think that so many people don't understand that. They can't separate the traits of a person from the actual personality and beliefs of a person. And so, yes, I am gay, and yes, I am Black, but that does not mean that automatically makes me a good person. Does not mean it automatically makes me, you know, a feminist or whatever. Even though I am those things, I am a feminist, and I try to my best to support those support good causes. Being gay and Black does not mean that I automatically am a good person. And I think that a lot of times we'll see a lot of people going like, well, she's Black, so it's not bad, right? It's like, no. Or he's Black, so he obviously, you know, he's doing the right thing, right? That's not how that works. It's
not at all. And I think that is also why it's so important that we don't separate economic justice from social justice. Like, I don't think this can be this thing where it's like, oh, if we invest in Black businesses, they may be homophobic or whatever right now, but like getting that wealth in the Black community will help us be able to be successful. Like, no, we have to fight on like both sides, both economically and making sure that like we get what we're owed, and socially making sure that we are seen as human beings, that we are respected, that we are all different types of things. Like, we cannot separate the two.
Yeah, exactly. I think so many times in life, I think that like we just have this kind of there's this expectation that, you know, having a person of color or a BIPOC in a position of power means that you won't have to worry anymore. Like, there's no reason to worry now because we have somebody who looks like us in the seat. And it's like you said before, it's not just someone who looks like us, someone who shares our beliefs, who shares our understandings, who shares our morals. And like, just be, like I said, I mean, there are black conservatives out there that are gay, Christian Walker being one of them, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are people out there who are not looking for the best interest of minority groups or of the minority group they are a part of. And it's frustrating in society that we can't see that people can be more than just one thing, that we can't see that even though you are black, that does not mean that you can't be anti-black. Even though you are a gay person does not mean that you still can't be homophobic. You know, even though you are whatever, doesn't mean you can't be whatever. So it's just crazy to me that we can't see that people are multifaceted, and that yes, having a person of color in having a marginalized person in a higher position does help representation. But like I said before, is there action in that representation? Is it just one black person, or is it multiple people of color in that position, in positions like that? Oftentimes you'll notice this thing, and I didn't know this a long time ago, but like you will see that a lot of black people or people of color are in middle management. So they're like, they might be the manager of that particular place, or they might be whatever, and that's kind of like almost the highest they can go. Whereas the regional and the CEOs and the people who are making the big decisions are all still virtually white. You know what I mean? Very much so. Very much so.
Or even if like they are in the C-suite, like they're given like chief diversity officer.
Yes, exactly. Or like you said, they're very much so the one that like. So give us the urban. What is that? Like, give us that black stuff. We know you do black things. What is that about? Or give us the gay stuff. What is that? Like you said before, it really boggles them down, like to their minority, their margin. So whatever margin they're in, it's like that's all that they can represent. That's all they can talk about. So like if you're a black person at a Vogue conversation, or what it case to be, it's only about black. It's like if you can bring how do we bring in the urban crowd? That's how do we do that? Like it's not about trying to talk about the systems or the other stuff like that. It's like you said, it's just very much so they're a monolith for the entire community, and whatever they decide, it's like, oh, like what was that? I don't forget. There was one sketch that SNL did. It was a really, really, really racist sketch that the studio execs like passed on, thankfully. But it was a really, really racist sketch, and it was written by a black person. And so the argument that some people had was like, why not? It was a black person who made it, so it's funny, right? It's kind of like, no, just because, like, no, baby, that doesn't mean they can't still perpetuate stereotypes.
Exactly.
You know?
And I think that also whenever we have these conversations, we also have to realize even with people who are like witted or whatever, they're not always like down. So like bringing back up Barack Obama, like there were some ways where he'd made progress, but there were some times when he was just like, okay, I'm only going to progress to a certain level and that's it. And so I think even with like Black-owned businesses, there are times when they are going to push the button forward until they're comfortable enough, and that's where they're going to stop. And in reality, there are so many other ways people are marginalized to where they need that envelope pushed even further. And I think that it's honestly very disrespectful that a lot of times we have this idea that like, oh, the problems that the Black community faces, they need to solve on their own. Like you're not going to like blow up somebody's house and be like, oh, I blew up your house, but like it's your house, so you got to fix it.
Exactly. I think that's a lot of, it goes back to that, like I said, to being the multifaceted people and understanding that like the reality is like we are raised in a society that tells us that Black people are not good enough. And it's impossible not for there to be a few Black people who do believe that, who do believe that's all that they can do, that's all they're capable of. We are raised in a sexist society, and as a person who is male, as a person who presents male in society, I benefit from male privilege. So there are things that I don't understand that women have to go through every day that I don't have to because I benefit from patriarchy. You know what I'm saying? And I think that a lot of times being an ally or being someone trying to fight for that community or fight for whatever, it's about always being aware of your privileges. I don't have many as a gay Black person, but as a person who presents male, I do have some degree of privilege that I have to recognize. You know what I'm saying? There's certain things that we have to do as people to consistently keep us going and keep us changing, keep us evolving, and understanding how to be a feminist how to be feminist, how to be inclusionary, how to be all those things, because unfortunately society is going to always push back against that. And so there shouldn't be a cap out point. There shouldn't be okay, that's enough black, that's enough of that nigga shit, that's not like that's
like we're good. I'm comfortable, so we all have to be comfortable.
That's enough of that gay shit right there. We did enough gay stuff this month, whatever. Like I said, is that the pride celebrations that all these quote unquote businesses that suddenly love gay people now is like,
and the July 1st hit.
All that shit's in the trash. All of it's in the rainbows, trash, garbage. And it's kind of like, so you support us when it's convenient, or when it's convenient for you, but not throughout the rest of the time. You support gay people when it's convenient or when it's beneficial for you, but not
profitable.
And profitable for you, but not during the rest of the days of the year. The same thing with black people. So it's so, or people of color in general, it's so frustrating because we don't realize, and sometimes people don't even see that it's kind of like the way that we are going to consistently make that change is to keep holding these people accountable when they fuck up. And it's kind of like, just because you had one gay flag or one fucking one Juneteenth fucking t-shirt in your damn store does not mean does not absolve you from the racism. So I want to ask you, Daquon, also, like, do you think that black capitalism is more beneficial to the black community than reparations?
No. I think going back to like something I said earlier, like we can't expect black people to fix all of the problems that white supremacy has created, because A, we did not create these problems, and B, we don't have the resources, or we have barriers to resources in order to fix them.
Exactly. I think that reparations, honestly and truly, like systemic changes to the environment, like the only way that we are going to make last, and we've talked about this before, but we're going to keep talking about it, keep bringing it up, because that's what we do, the Melanin Margin. But anyway, the only way that we're going to make systemic changes, like you said before, it comes from the sharing of power. And the reality is, white people don't want to give up that power. And so reparations will have to be, number one, like they said, America has still not apologized for racism. Still not apologized for slavery. We're still waiting on that shit after how many years now? Like how many centuries? We still have not gotten a real apology for it, let alone reparations. And the reality is, because once again, like I brought up before, like white people or white society and white supremacy does not want to acknowledge its downfall, does not want to acknowledge the power it has. It wants to keep us in the dark about what the reality is of the situation, which is why they give us Juneteenth and think that that's enough, or blah, 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 or whatever. And they were like, we all got Black History Month. Y'all got Juneteenth. We gave y'all that. We're good, right? Like we're here.
We're done. That's enough of the black.
That's enough. That's enough of the black. But yeah, like it really is. It gives that very energy. And I think that when it comes to those things, like the only way that we're going to make a huge shift in power is to uproot some of the power that white people have, and they still have to this day. If we don't break that down and spread that wealth a little bit more and have the rightful reparations given to people of color, and to absolutely help break down some of those systems, we will never go any further. And like you said, black capitalism, is great as it is, like you said before, it's only but a matter of time before white people go like, let's go ahead and fuck that up real quick. Let's go ahead and buy them out so we can have that. And now we get the black audience, and now we get the black people. You know what I'm saying? There are so many hair companies that I've heard of that have been bought up by white conglomerates and have changed their entire formula to benefit all people. It's right. Like, you gotta make sure that it fits everybody, when it's like the reason why those companies were created was because people of color didn't have the proper hair products to use for their hair, because it was not created. But then the lines changed to benefit or to cater towards wider audiences, or like, and stuff like that. So I think that the reality is the only way they're going to make some systemic change is having those reparations and having actual recognition of the problem that exists, and consistent working to make that problem to rectify the issue. You know what I mean?
Right. We got to get to the roots of these inequitable, unjust systems. We can't just like comb the top over and be like, all right, we're good.
Period. So that's on period. That's on period. So many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for a change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. Now, in the article from Black Past written by Tristan Michael Pelton, we learn about Queen Latifah. Born Dana Elaine Owens on March 18, 1970 in Newark, New Jersey, Queen Latifah is the most influential woman in history of rap music. The Muslim name Latifah, which translates roughly to delicate, sensitive, and kind, was adopted by Owens at the age of 8 with the help from a cousin. In 1989, Latifah added the Queen at the beginning of her name and released her first full-length album, All Hail the Queen. The album was one of the first feminist hip-hop albums released for its time. After a brief hiatus following the death of her brother, Lance, during a motorcycle accident, Queen Latifah recorded Black Rain in 1993, which sold 500,000 copies, making it the first gold album by a female rapper. Black Rain featured the song Unity, which confronted the anti-feminist rhetoric and domestic violence, which was increasingly prominent in the work of male rap acts and artists, even now to this fucking day. The song's socially conscious lyrics earned Latifah her first Grammy Award for Best Solo Rap Performance, the first for a female in that genre. Now, during this time, Latifah directed her attention towards acting and starred in the popular 1990 sitcom Living Single. Following in the footsteps of previous Black movie stars like Diana Ross, who sang and acted, Latifah accepted a jazz role as a jazz singer in Living Out Loud. She used this role to demonstrate her spectacular singing talents, which were downplayed in her rap records. Now, in 2002, she played Mama Morton in the film movie adaptation of the musical Chicago, which earned her her first Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Now, in a male-dominated genre that is largely misogynistic, Queen Latifah has managed to carve out a specific feminist niche, which while still maintaining her credentials as a major rap artist. Her continued popularity makes Latifah, according to the many observers, the most important Black woman in music since Diana Ross. At the 2021 BET Awards, during her acceptance speech for her Lifetime Achievement Award, she publicly, for the first time, acknowledged her partner Ebony and son Rebel, ending the speech with Happy Pride. Baby! Black queer women fucking it up for all of us. You better work, bitch. You better work.
A true queen.
A true queen.
And so in an article, Black History News, which was produced by Columbia University, we learned that Anna Julia Hayward Cooper, 1858 to 1964, was a writer, teacher, and activist who championed education for African Americans and women. She attended Oberlin College in Ohio on a scholarship, earning a BA in 1884 and a master's degree in mathematics in 1887. After graduation, Cooper worked at Wilberforce University and St. Augustine's before moving to Washington, D.C. to teach at Washington Colored High School. Cooper published her first book, A Voice from the South by a Black Woman of the South, in 1892. In addition to calling for equal education for women, A Voice from the South advanced Cooper's assertion that educated African American women were necessary for uplifting the entire Black race. Cooper also established and co-founded several organizations to promote Black civil rights causes. She helped found the Colored Women's League in 1892, and she joined the executive committee of the first Pan-African Conference in 1900. Since the Young Women's Christian Association and Young Men's Christian Association did not accept African American members, she created colored branches to provide support for young Black migrants moving from the South into Washington, D.C. In 1925, at the age of 67, Cooper became the fourth African-American woman to obtain a doctorate of philosophy. And I just want to point out, she was born in 1858. She was born in bondage. She was born a slave, and she died in 1964. So just for the record, like, she died like after my dad was born. So there were slaves alive a lot recently.
Mm-hmm. That's what people don't understand is that, baby, this ain't too far back in the past. Like it's not
Right.
that too far, baby. Don't let them black and white photos fool you, okay? So, but black women, this is black women constantly fucking it up, constantly rising the bar. Bitch, you better work. Like, yes,
Right.
ma'am. Like, not a doctorate degree in philosophy. She said, bitch, who gonna check me, boo? Like, yes, ma'am. So, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you are using. Now, if you want to follow us on our social media, our handles are at Andre Talks a Lot and at Daquon950. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram at The Melanin Margin for updates of new content. We will see you all next week on The Melanin Margin, where conversations about race are never off the table, honey.